All right, what's up, YouTube? I'm excited because we're doing something a little bit different. We are talking Mutt Lang, we're talking guitar tones, we're talking buying broken things off a reverb that you have to send back. you know, all that stuff. So, what I've got here is a re recorded version of Hysteria by Def Leppard, and I did it right here in my own studio. So, what we're going to do is we're going to listen to it, and then we're going to go through all the different pieces and kind of talk about what I learned and how I got there. So it's a really fun challenge and a cool exercise, if you're a producer, to kind of really listen deeply and kind of dissect a song down to its arrangement, its performance, recording, mixing, and ultimately figure out how we can use our own tools that are available to us to achieve something very similar, because that's what it's all about. I love learning about the gear. I love researching where they recorded this stuff and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about our ears and about how we listen and understand sound and how we ultimately accomplish that same sound, with the stuff that we have available to us in the year 2024, because we're talking about a record that was cut on tape. We're talking about a lot of gear that's older, that, it's not around anymore. And so ultimately, that's not so important as, like I said, dialing our ears into the sound and kind of figuring out how to achieve something very similar. And on that note, I will say that it's easy to obsess so much about matching a sound when you do this sort of thing that you can start to do wacky things. Like you might have 20 bands of EQ going, doing crazy radical stuff that you would never do in an ordinary context, but you're so obsessed with matching a sound that you start doing stuff like that. And then, what are we really learning there? I think it's more about identifying the qualities in the sound that are really important to the way that sound works in the arrangement and in the song, and then trying to hit all those cylinders in our own sound. So I'm not going to obsess too much about completely matching the sound and making it like a one-to-one copy. It's more about capturing the same feeling. So let's go ahead and just play it top to bottom. It's only about a minute and a half long, and then I'll start digging in and talking about, what I learned along the way. So here we go. Here's Hysteria. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, Man, there's a lot going on here. This was a real challenge, but man, it was a lot of fun too. So, anyway, maybe we could just start with the drums, because that's what I started with. So here we go. Here's a little bit of drums. So yeah, sounds like Def Leppard to me. And I should mention, I'm going to go ahead and bounce some one-shot samples of these drums, and I'll have them available to download in the link below. So check that out if you're interested. Here's what I know about the original recording. according to an interview I saw with Mike Shipley. So Mutt really had this vision kind of starting around the Pyromania record with Def Leppard, where he wanted this larger than life sound. He really said, like, there's this funny quote where he was like, kids these days, they don't care anything about honky little snare drums. They're going to see Star Wars. So he really was after kind of creating that cinematic scope in the world of rock production, and it had a lot to do with the drums. So they got really experimental. They started using a lot of unconventional techniques, especially for the time, especially in regards to like sampling. So for what I understand, they were using something like the Fairlight sampler to record drums into, and then they could use that to detune them. They could stack samples. They could process them heavily, and then they could program the beat. So what we're hearing on the Hysteria record really is a programmed drum beat with live recorded cymbals. That's a really great technique, and even to this day, with how far sampling has come, it's still a good technique sometimes if you've got a really great drum sound, but it just feels a little bit sterile, a little bit robotic. Mute the cymbals and cut some live cymbals of your own, and that can really go a long way to kind of giving it a human feel, because so much of that human feel happens in the cymbals, in the nuance of those cymbals. So anyway, in this particular case, I did the whole thing programmed with Superior Drummer. So Superior Drummer is really great. It's super simple and easy to program a beat really fast. I'll usually start with like a super just basic sound, just so I can get the beat down. And then after the beat is done, I can go through and start working on the tones. I knew going into this that this would involve probably a lot of layering and sample stacking, which is exactly what happened. So basically, I would listen to my drum, like the kick drum, for instance, and then I would go check out the Def Leppard record, and then I would listen to mine and think about what I was missing, and then go find a sample that kind of has that quality that I'd like to bring into mine, blend it in, listen again. Is there anything else? Is there anything else mine's missing? And again, same thing. Go find a sample that has that quality, blend it in. That seemed to be the shortest path from A to B in order to accomplish a sound like this. It's a very larger than life kind of drum sound. It's not particularly natural sound, so you can kind of get away with this, adding a lot of drum sounds. So anyway, let's solo up the kick drum and have a listen. All right, cool. So what I'll do here is I'll mute all the extra samples, and we'll just listen to the initial kick drum that was coming out of Superior that I started with. It's not bad. It's punchy. I like it, but I can tell that this next sample right here is kind of the bulk of the sound. Check this out. Yeah, so there's a lot of low end, and it's a really nice, thick sound. And then from there, I remember what I was hearing in the Def Leppard record was this really cool envelope to the kick drum note where it kind of pitches downward. And I found this really nice electronic kick drum that kind of gave me that thing. Check this out. It's kind of got that like Genesis kind of sound, and it's a really great sample. So let's hear what that sounds like blended in with the live kicks. And so that's feeling pretty good to me. And one other thing I'm going to talk about is that's really important. When you start layering lots of drums together, you can run into a lot of phase problems, and usually it involves a lot of just playing with it. You might flip the polarity on some of the samples. You might play with like a delay to time align them, or whatever you got to do just to get everything playing together nicely and in a way that feels really satisfying. In this particular case, I had luck with this plugin Auto Align. So a lot of you probably know about this, but this plugin basically will analyze everything that you put into it and calculate how much things need to be time aligned in order to achieve the most amount of phase coherency between everything that you put it on. And it worked really well. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass it, and then we're going to listen to what the kick drum sounded like without it, and then I'm going to put it in and you can hear what that's doing for us. Yeah, so that's really doing a lot. It's really tightening things up. It's focusing the low end, and it's also making it feel like one kick drum, because without it, it kind of feels like multiple kick drums. It feels a little bit flammy or something. But with it, it sounds like a very focused, just it sounds like one drum with a really big sound. So I'm really happy with how that came out. Let's go to the snare drum. So just like the kick drum, what I'm going to do is I'll play the sound that was coming out of Superior that I started with, and then I'll bring in these samples one by one, and we'll chat about what they're doing. Yeah, so that's doing a lot right there. That's real smacky, kind of very heavily compressed sample. Let's see what the next one does. So that's cool. That's giving us that high end thing that the Def Leppard drums have, where it almost sounds like white noise or something. It's like, psh, psh. It's a really cool sound. That's the thing about those Def Leppard drums is that they're super full range. The snare drum really goes, it has a lot of low end, it has a lot of high end, and you can just tell that there's a lot of stacking happening. So anyway, let's check out the next one. So these aren't real loud in the balance. It sounds like they're just kind of adding a little bit more thickness. And then the last piece of the puzzle, which is a really important part of the sound, is actually not a snare drum. It's a tom. And basically, I'm going to play the snare drums for you, and then I'm going to put this in, and you can hear how big a difference that makes. Yeah, so that's a really important part of this sound is that tom. And I know that was a pretty common thing too back then. Sometimes if you want to get like a lot of low end out of a snare drum, rather than trying to just EQ loads of bass into it, sometimes you have better luck just triggering a tom sample. And that's what we did here, and it works really great. So next thing up, I guess we'll talk about the toms. And there's not a lot of them in here. It only happens at a few moments, but they're really key moments. So let's just listen to a little bit. Yeah, cool. So I don't have it, it's all committed, so I can't show you, but basically I just went into Superior and I kind of tested out a bunch of electronic toms. According to Mike Shipley, they were using Simmons. They were using Simmons electronic drum kits for the toms on this record, and I don't know what drum machine that's from. It said SB1200 Techno Kit. I don't know what that is, but anyway, it sounded so similar to me that I went with it, and I like it a lot. So, cool. Cymbals, not a lot to talk about really. I just kind of found some that fit in the mix well and went with it. So, I think that's about it on the drums. Let's just listen to them one more time. Yeah, it's a cool sound. And like I said, I'm going to have some samples available below if you guys want to download those. But let's go check out the bass. Not a lot going on with the bass. It's just basic kind of rock bass sound, but I believe it was a jazz bass, and I played it with a pick. So let's just hear a little bit of what that sounds like. So, it's got a nice woody kind of attack to it. Like I said, not much going on there. I do see this amp on here, this amp plugin. This isn't typical for me. I imagine what happened was after we started getting guitars in, I needed this bass to really kind of creep up more into the mid-range so it could kind of compete more. And amps can be a great way to do that. So that's that. And then let's move on to the guitars. So let's talk about this main clean guitar part, because this was the part that, I was really having a hard time with. And what it was is that, about 90% of the guitars on Def Leppard records are the Rockman X100. And if you don't know what that is, basically the Rockman X100 was this battery-powered, portable, guitar headphone amp it was meant for like practicing more than anything. But eventually, some producers kind of took a liking to it, like Mutt, and it just had a real specific sound right out of the box. There's hardly any controls. That's what they used on about, according to Phil Collin, the guitar player, they used that on about 90% of the guitars on this record. And so, keeping with the theme of working with the tools we have available to us instead of obsessing too much over what they used, I was determined to figure out that sound without buying one. And so what happened is I started recording direct. A lot of great guitar tones are direct. In the 80s, there was a lot of guys doing that, in the LA session scene with, Dan Huff and Michael Landau. So many of those great guitar tones in the 80s were recorded direct and then heavily processed later with outboard processing, compression, EQ, delay, modulation. So I figured, the Rockman sound is basically a direct sound, really. So surely I can accomplish something similar going direct and experimenting with pedals, guitars, different pickups, different outboard processing, plugins, whatever. Like, surely I can figure out a way to get that sound. But there was some quality about the original that I just was not getting. And I must have spent several hours trying all sorts of different things. I mean, wacky stuff at a certain point, and it was not coming together. So I broke down. I went on Reverb, and I bought a Rockman X100. I thought, okay, I guess I have no choice. And once it came in, it wasn't working. So it had one side that was working, but it wasn't sounding right to me. So I got a hold of the guy. I said, you know what? I can repair this thing myself. If you just want to give me a partial refund, I will order the components and I will recap it and all that stuff. But he really just wanted to take it back and do that himself. So anyway, sent that back. I was going to order another one. But then I just randomly remembered that my dad had this amp when I was a kid that I remember playing a lot. Here, I have it right here, actually. So this right here is the Galen Kruger 250 ML. So some of you might recognize this. This was the amp that Alex Lifeson from Rush was playing right around the Moving Pictures era. And I got to thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? That is just basically a Rockman with speakers. I mean, I don't have any inside information about it as far as the design and stuff goes, but, it's solid state. It's got a lot of the same controls, 2 channels, compression, echo, chorus. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's just like basically a Rockman with speakers. So anyway, and it has a direct out on the back as well. So that's what I ended up doing. I came direct out of this, and let's go ahead and just listen to what that sounds like, because it's a really good sound and it's pretty close, but I'll talk about an extra step I took to get it just a little bit closer. So let's listen to that. This is just the Galen Kruger amp by itself. And you'll notice right here, I've got some effects. I like to record, especially when I'm recording direct. I really like to record with effects. It's just a little more inspiring to play. I just prefer to have it baked into the sound like that because, rather than having to do it later. So anyway, so here it is with the effects. I've got an H3000. It was probably doing some chorus or something cool. And then I got a little bit of reverb. And you know what? It's really close. Like, a lot of people probably would have been perfectly happy at that point. But there was still this kind of mid-range quality to the other one that I was chasing the whole time. And so I decided I would record a DI as well. And what I'm doing with this DI, I'll show you. So basically, here's what the DI sounds like by itself. Nothing too exciting. It's just a regular kind of direct guitar sound. But what I was able to do with this, though, is I was able to apply a very particular kind of EQ and saturation that would help to bring out those harmonics I was wanting to hear. So you can see right here on this Pro Q3, I'm boosting with a very narrow Q some very specific harmonics that I was hearing in the original recording that I wasn't getting out of mine. And then I'm just basically pulling out everything above and below it. And then if you follow that with some distortion or saturation like this Sans amp, this is really good for this sort of thing. It'll kind of excite those harmonics in a really cool way. So listen to what this sounds like on its own, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but... Now, do you hear that? Ooh, 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 ooh. I mean, it's almost like got a rhythm to it or something in that harmonic. That was really important to me, and I wasn't hearing it in my sound. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mute that DI track with the processing on it. We're going to listen to the full mix because that's really where the difference is noticeable to me. And I will put in this DI track and you can hear how it shifts that mid-range to a really cool place. Let's check that out. Yeah, that's really important to me. Without it, it's just a bit too scooped in the mids or something, and it doesn't really have its own spot in the mix. You know, it kind of is fighting with the snare drum or something without it. But that mid-range push kind of helps put it in its own place. So, yeah, I'm really happy with how that came out. And that's just the stuff that you do sometimes. You know, DIs can be really useful for that sort of thing. Cool. So let's check out some of these other guitars we got in the intro. There's a lot of cool stuff happening here. So this first sound, I'll talk about how I got this. So it's this cool kind of like ghosty, you know, vibrato thing. And, you know, I don't know how they did that on the original recording because I'm hearing a chord, but it's harmonics. So the only way I knew how to do it was to record each note of the chord that I was hearing. And then when I did that, you know, I was doing some vibrato on the tremolo bar, but it was sounding more like coarse or something because each track, you know, had a slightly different motion to it. So I recorded it again, you know, just totally straight like this. Let me remove this. You know, and all you got to do is add a little crossfade to the beginning to make it swell in. And then the real secret, though, is this plugin right here. This is the knee old Warble by Plugin Alliance. And it's basically a vibrato plugin. Like, check this out. Yeah, and that to me is kind of the sound right there. So what that does is that makes the vibrato, the motion of the vibrato, exactly the same on all the different notes. So that worked out pretty well. I was pretty happy with that. And then after that, what do we have? Yeah, so we've got this cool swell that happens in the right speaker. And then it's followed by this cool tremolo guitar in the left. Same thing on this one. I recorded it like this. And then I added this vibrato pedal. That was another situation where I did it with the tremolo bar, but then it wasn't feeling quite right to me, so I tried it again with a vibrato plugin, and I liked the way it came together. So last part, I think, is just this distorted stuff right here. And that's a cool part. That kind of takes us into the verse in a really cool way. So now we're into the verse, and let's talk about what's going on there. There's a couple of really cool things happening. Touch, out of reach, yeah. You could try to get closer to me. I'm in love. Okay, cool. So you'll notice halfway through, we have this really cool development that happens where these distorted electrics enter in, and then there's like a slight change on the drums. There's really just one change on the drums, which is they add a tom on beat 2 of each bar, but it feels like a lot. And I think that kind of points to Mutt and his ability, his ear for development and very simple, subtle changes that really elevate a part. So, one thing that's kind of crazy that I've heard this song my entire life, and I can't believe I've never picked up on this, but the picking pattern of the main riff actually changes once those distorted electrics enter in. So, like, check this out. This is the start of the verse. And then listen to how the picking pattern changes subtly once the electrics come in. I'm in love. I'm in deep, yeah. Yeah, notice how they simplified it. It goes from do do dum down down dum bow down bow down dum to dum down bow down dum down 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 dum. And I think probably what that was is that once those distorted guitars came in, that was just a little too busy, so they simplified it. And that's a nice development, it keeps things interesting. Like I said, it kind of points back to Mutt and his ear for development and subtle changes that aren't big enough changes for the listener to be caught off guard or to even notice. But it definitely adds momentum. It keeps the thing moving forward in a nice way. And there's another YouTuber, Bobby Huff. If you haven't seen this stuff, if you're a fan of Mutt Lange and his techniques, check out Bobby Huff because he's got a lot of really cool videos on Mutt Lange techniques, and he calls this the rule of 8. So basically, if you go check out any Mutt Lange production, there will not be any 8 bars that are identical. Every 8 bars, at least, there is some kind of change that happens. There's some development. And that's just what maintains all that momentum and kind of keeps us engaged and captivated as a listener, while being subtle enough that it never robs attention away from the vocal or the most important elements in the mix, the melody, So I love that. I thought that was a really smart move, and it just kind of gives me, like I said, you dig into these things and you kind of get inside the track. You feel like you kind of are getting insight into maybe what they were thinking when they were making it in a really cool way. So moving on, let's go to the pre-chorus. The pre-chorus is pretty much the same clean guitar sound we've been hearing the whole time, but there's a couple changes I made that I think are important. So let's talk about that. I gotta know tonight if you're alone tonight. Can't stop this feeling. Can't stop this fire. Oh, yeah. All right, so you can probably hear what's different there. Basically, I have these acoustic guitars that I added in, and let me mute those, and then we'll listen without them, and then I'll describe kind of what I was wanting to hear different. I gotta know tonight if you're alone tonight. Basically, all I was feeling was like, yeah, it's a little bit too electric or something, and I don't think on the original recording there's any acoustic guitar. I'm not sure. I can't tell. But whatever way that my electric guitar is slightly different sounding, it benefits from having this additional acoustic guitar in this part. So this is a choice that I made that wasn't based on what was happening in the original recording so much as just what I wanted to hear. And so I'll put those back in and we'll just hear. They add a nice kind of shimmer and sparkle. Check it out. I gotta know tonight if you're alone tonight. Yeah, I love that. I think that came out great. And then there's these crunchy kind of rhythm guitars too. And this, I believe, was in the original recording. I felt like I was hearing that. It just makes it just a little more powerful sounding than it would have sounded with just the clean guitars. So anyway, that's pretty much the pre-chorus. We should move on to the chorus. And there's a lot of cool stuff to talk about in the chorus. So basically, there's a symphony of just like distorted electric guitars that come in on the chorus. There's a lot of really cool parts, and you know, I'm just listening to the stereo mix and trying to make out what I can hear. There's basically no chance that I played all these parts exactly how they did, because you can't make them out enough to really learn them. So what I did is I would do it like I did on the drums. I would record a piece, and then I would listen back, compare it to the reference, think about what mine was missing, add that part, and then sometimes I just had to kind of come up with my own part until I had something that felt satisfying. It kind of felt like the original recording. So all these guitars I'll mention were mostly, I think, a Les Paul into my Marshall Silver Jubilee. And I know that, they used a Rockman on all this stuff, I'm sure. But I know that amp well enough to know that I was going to kind of get what I was after recording a live amp, because it has that sound. It's a great amp for like 80s rock rhythm. So let's check out the first part I put down, which would have been this kind of crunchy low notes, And then I had this feeling that maybe I played it a little bit too muted. So I just added one more guitar, playing it a little more open. And it's just in that one speaker on the left, which I think also kind of adds a little bit more dimension stereo-wise to have it, just the tight, crunchy one on the right and just a little more open on the left. The next part, I think, was this arpeggiated kind of cool lick. And you'll hear a little bit of like a dotted eighth delay on there. So that would have been a pedal. I really like rhythmic delays on guitars, even used very subtly like this, because it kind of just adds a little more excitement to it, a little more motion. And also, a lot of times I will use a pedal rather than using a plugin After Effects, because a plugin delay is going to be like perfectly tempo locked and perfectly in time. But I kind of like that the guitar pedal isn't, I think it's just like a little bit of human feel that we're not getting whenever we use a plugin that's like perfectly tempo locked. And in a production like this that's like super programmed, very highly processed, any little touch of human feel we can add in there, I think is a good thing. So anyway, the next part, let's check that out. Yeah, it's a weird part on its own, but in the context of the full arrangement, it's really important. It really adds a lot of excitement. You can hear the delay on there is a little bit more prominent. And then this part right here, I remember I wasn't sure if I was hearing this in the recording or not. It just felt like right, it felt like it needed it. It just happens during that question and answer segment with the lead vocal and the BGVs. It kind of helps highlight that section in a cool way. And then lastly, we've got these chords on the last time through the chord progression. And these are really important because there's a subtle note change happening in the BGV harmonies right here that kind of adds to the finality of this chorus. It feels climactic and it kind of resolves in a cool way. And they added these guitar strums just on the end of the chorus that highlight that in a really cool way. Check it out. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So what we'll do is we'll solo up these parts, and I'll put them in one by one because they add up really cool. Check this out. Yeah, pretty cool. Like I said, it's like this symphony, of electric guitar, and man, it's cool. I like that a lot. I had a lot of fun working on that. And one thing to note too is that there's a lot of parts, but they're all real simple. And they all work together like a puzzle. So it could get confusing. And sometimes when you do an arrangement like this, I've had this experience before, you'll add one part, and then you'll go add the next part, and then you need to go back to the first part and simplify it because it gets confusing. You know, you kind of realize, well, this extra part is really cool, but now it feels a little too chaotic, so I'll go back to the first one. And that's usually how these things go, you know. The more you add, the more you have to go back and sort of revise the things you added previously to make it all play together in a way that doesn't feel confusing, you know. So, and then the last guitar part is this ebow on the outro. So that's just an ebow and a slide and a lot of delay. You know, it's one of those things that's like, it's so simple. Like we're talking about, it's so simple, it's so subtle, but man, it really takes us to another place. You know, it really takes us to that otherworldly place that this song is kind of trying to take us. So yeah, I love that. Again, simple, but very effective. So I think that about wraps up things on the guitars. A lot of cool parts. I had a lot of fun working on that. You know, I'm such a nerd about like guitar arrangement and stuff. And, you know, if you play on a lot of records, if you're interested in playing on records, like I said, Mutt Lange, these records, you can't hardly go wrong studying these things because it's a type of playing, it's a type of guitar arranging that I think translates well to modern records as well. You know, lots of little parts rather than one big part that's really prominent. That can work so well to just highlight a song. All right, so let's check out the lead vocal. I gotta say, you know, I'm not Joe Elliott. I'm not really even a singer. You know, I tell people I'm like David Bowie if you ordered him off of Temu. Like, that's how I would describe my singing style. But I have a lot of fun producing vocalists. And, you know, I've worked with enough of them to kind of have this feeling that most people are capable of more than they realize. With the right coaching, with the right encouragement, with the right techniques in the studio, I really enjoy that process of trying to get more out of somebody than maybe they thought they were even capable of. And it's something that's always been really fulfilling to me. In most modern records, you know, the vocal is the star of the show. So it's really important not just to get things really in tune, but to get them just captivating. Sometimes you recut a line for no other reason. You know, sometimes there's not anything wrong with it, but I'm just like, can we just do another one? I'm just looking for that magic take, you know. And that's part of it. So let's check out the lead vocal. There's not a lot to talk about except, you know, I'll talk a little bit about the processing because it's kind of typical processing for rock vocals of this era. So let's check it out. Out of touch, out of reach, yeah. So basically what I got here, and it's all outboard stuff, just because, you know, it's all kind of from that era, and I think it works well. But I've got a doubler, which is my H3000 on the micro pitch shift preset. And then I've got a mono delay because I was listening to the record and there was this eighth note delay with quite a bit of feedback, you know, quite a bit of repeats that seemed mono. And it adds a nice excitement to the vocal, and it also adds a nice depth. You know, mono delays can be really cool for that. They kind of take it back into the speakers in a cool way. And then a little bit of reverb. So I'm going to play the vocal dry. Ugh. And then I'm going to like just add in these effects one by one so you can kind of hear what they're doing. Out of touch. Here's a doubler. Out of reach, yeah. And then here's delay. You could try to get closer to me. And a little bit of reverb. I'm in love. I'm in deep, yeah. So yeah, pretty cool. Like I said, that's pretty typical kind of rock vocal processing. A little bit of doubling, a little bit of delay, a little bit of reverb. I wouldn't really use reverb except on like tracks like this that are a little bit slower and there's a lot of space in between lines. But cool, let's get to the background vocals, which is the really fun part. First of all, I love background vocals. It's another one of my favorite parts. I have a lot of favorite parts if you haven't noticed. I love making records, but anyway, background vocals are a really fun part for me, and especially on a Def Leppard style track. So what we've got here is looks like 36. We got 36 background vocals. Now, there's not 36 at once, you know. Really what it is more than anything is like each of these different sections of vocals have to be balanced a very certain way. So it's a little bit easier if I just have them on their separate sets of tracks. You know, I can do a balance for each of these parts, and I don't have to do a ton of like volume automations to make it work from section to section. So that's why your track count can end up being really high sometimes. But let's solo it up. Let's hear what's going on in the backgrounds, and then I'll talk a little bit about, you know, what we got going on.
Hysterical, hysteria. Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it? Magical, mysteria. When you get that feeling, better stop believing, 'cause it's a miracle. Say you will.
You know, it's funny, you hear a couple of bad edits in there. Anytime I'm working on this stuff, you know, I'm never listening to it in solo. I built this whole thing without ever listening to it in solo, so I would have noticed those edits, but, you know, if I don't notice them in the full mix, I'm not worried about it. It just doesn't matter. Unless you're going to be going on YouTube and soloing stuff like I'm doing right now, it just doesn't matter. So if I heard it in the full mix, I would go find it and I would fix it. If I don't hear it, I'm not worried about it. So there's that. But okay, first thing that comes in is we're doubling the lead vocal. So on the record, I noticed that, you know, there was something happening to the lead vocal dimensionally when the chorus hit. And usually what that is just doubling. So we've got 3 tracks of me singing the lead vocal.
Hysterical, hysteria.
And then the next thing that I thought was really cool was I was hearing these harmonies coming in kind of just at the end of each line. I mean, it almost sounded like just the half of like one word at the end of each line, kind of like this.
Hysterical, hysteria.
So basically there's like 2 parts. We've got this one. You know, I'm just going, Rhea! Like I'm not even singing the whole word. And then we got this part below it. And man, that just adds so much like dynamics and like a really cool just excitement to the vocal. It's super, that's a super like Def Leppard-y thing. You know, you hear that in a lot of their records where they kind of have, they just highlight a certain word. That's another thing that I love about this background vocal arrangement is that it kind of has all the things I love to hear in a background vocal arrangement. You know, it highlights the lead vocal. It goes off, it does its own thing sometimes. And it's just very dynamic and very exciting to listen to. So the next thing we have is that question and answer segment between the lead vocal where they're kind of bouncing back and forth. So let's check that out. Here's the first part I would have put down for that.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
You know, it's interesting that I would have started with that part, but I did feel like I was hearing a monotone harmony. And monotone harmonies are like a really important part of a dense vocal arrangement like this, because if all of your parts have movement to them, if they're all moving around, sometimes just putting in a single monotone part that's singing one note can be a great way to kind of glue it all together, and also it adds a nice density to the background vocals. So that's what I'm doing right there. Let's see what the next part is.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
Okay, so I remember what that was. That's actually a duplicate of this part right here.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
So that part right there, I was having a really hard time just even getting those notes out, you can tell. So I wasn't able to kind of get the tonal quality I was wanting singing those notes. So I went ahead and sang it down just the best I could. And then I sang it again an octave lower with a really airy tone. Oh, can you feel it? And then I pitched that up with this little Alter Boy plugin.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
And you know, it sounds just so cheesy and weird by itself, but in the context of the full balance, it really goes a long way to giving us that airy quality to the top. That's a really big part of this style of background vocals. So let's check out what else we got.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
Just another harmony. That was one of those ones that I wasn't sure that I even heard it in the recording, but it just felt right in my arrangement, so I just put it down. And then right below that, I believe this is the same harmony, but pitched up an octave.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
Yeah, same kind of thing that I was doing before. So one more time, let's check it out all together.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
And then I want to mention something that might be surprising to some of you. So one thing I'm always thinking about when I'm doing these kind of things, and one thing I'm always thinking about when I'm listening to records, is the panning. So notice the panning on these background vocals. Pretty exciting, huh? It's all down the center. It's totally mono. And I had this realization. Basically, I had tracked all the vocals, and it sounded good to me. But then I just thought, I was the next step. Okay, what's the panning like? Went and listened to the record. I'm like, I'm pretty sure those are all just down the center, and I think they are. And it sounds really good that way, because what happens is when you have everything on top of each other like that, you get the most amount of phasing, and you get the most amount of that coursing and thickness. If you'll notice on a lot of records, you'll notice on Queen records, you'll notice on ELO records, those dense vocal backup vocals are a lot of times mono. For one thing, it kind of keeps space in the sides for instruments. So basically, we have so much stuff happening in the sides with the guitars that it would be really tough if I started putting these background vocals wide. I think it would just get confusing. It would get messy. Instead, what we have is it's super focused down the middle, and then we got the wide guitars. And it's like they say, if everything's stereo, then nothing's stereo, because where you get that width and that depth is when you have that contrast between elements that are super focused down the middle and then other elements that are super wide. So I think it's way more dynamic and interesting sounding to have this background vocals just be straight down the center and allow all the instruments to take up those sides and keep things exciting. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, about the panning. And then I should bring this up as well. You may have noticed that I have 3 tracks of each part.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it?
And there's a reason for this. So a lot of classic records, again, I'm going to bring up Queen, I'm going to bring up ELO because those are the ones that I know about, are triple tracked. And there's a very specific reason for this. Double tracking is really cool. There's a lot of great uses for it. But there's something that happens when you only have 2 voices, and it's the same thing that can happen if you've ever tried to record 2 horn players, or you've ever tried to record 2 string players playing any part like in unison, where it just sounds out of tune, no matter what. No matter how well they play it, it sounds a little bit out of tune, and then you want to go in and you're just going to end up wanting to melodyne and tune it all to try to fix the pitch, when instead, if you just add one more voice, something about that number, something about having 3 voices will reinforce the fundamental enough that it actually will feel like one note, but with a very thick sound. And then you don't have to tune anything. In fact, you don't want to, because those different pitch discrepancies between the 3 voices are what generate that thick, chorusy sound. So there's no pitch correction on any of this. This whole thing is completely just raw, except for the altar boy, where I'm pitching it up an octave, but you just don't need it when you have 3 voices going. So next time you're cutting background vocals, try triple tracking, because you might be surprised how little tuning and stuff you're going to feel like you need to do, because of the fact that, the 3 voices just join up so much better than just the 2. So anyway, I thought that was worth mentioning. And then the last piece of the puzzle with the background vocals, it's a really important part, is the processing. So Mutt was a fan of this system they had called the Dolby Noise Reduction System, and basically the way it worked when they were recording on tape is it would have a stage of EQ before and after the tape. So before the tape, there would be a big boost of treble, and then after the tape, it would reduce the treble the same amount. And what you would end up with was a sound that had, basically the same EQ minus a bunch of tape hiss, because all that tape hiss was kind of happening in the high frequencies. So what he discovered, though, is you could use the first stage of EQ with the treble boost without the second stage, and it had a very unique character to the treble and a very exciting, brightness that was really cool, especially on background vocals. So what we've got here is I actually have this plugin, and it's an emulation of that process, of that first stage of EQ, where you get that high frequency excitement. This one's by Overloud. There's a couple different people that do it. But what we're going to do is we're going to listen to this background vocal, and I'll have it in bypass, and then I'll put it in, and you can see how much this thing is doing. Check it out.
Oh, can you feel it? Do you believe it? Magical, Hysteria. When you get that feeling, better stop believing. 'Cause it's a...
I mean, that's the sound right there. One plugin. I probably would have had to monkey around with 5 different plugins for who knows how long to do what this thing just does right out of the box. I put it on, I turned the wet up all the way, I turned the compression up all the way. That seemed right to me. And yeah, man, I love this plugin. I got the demo, but I'll definitely be buying that one, because if you like Mutt Lange background vocals, that's a real key part of it. I put that on right away when I was tracking and everything, because I wanted to hear it sound, how it was supposed to, while I was recording it. So anyway, I think that's pretty much everything. Man, this was a lot of fun. It was a real challenge, but at the end of the day, I'm glad I did it. I think I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too. So drop a comment below if you have a question about something I talked about, or if you have a recommendation. I'd love to have you guys recommend some tracks you'd like to hear me take on. That would be really cool. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.